Well, welcome back to the Baseball Hut 2. We're talking about different things, not just about the New York Mets, but this is kind of a New York Met video. I guess we got some really bad news here. If you follow me, I've been talking a lot about Jacob deGrom since he signed with the Rangers. Now, before we get into this video, please, of course, subscribe to the Baseball Hut 2, where we talk about this. This channel is doing rather well. Just need you to watch as much of the videos, whatever videos I post, as you can. But a few minutes ago, I was reading online that I actually got an alert on my phone that the former ace of the New York Mets and ace of the Texas Rangers, Jacob deGrom, and I did a Jake video yesterday, and it kicked ass, But we got some bad news here about him. I guess he underwent an MRI. Now, yesterday, before we get to it, yesterday, he was placed on the 60-day DL or IL. And I said that was not good news. It was bad news, that something was worse than what was going on. Well, we got the news just a little while ago, and Jake needs to get Tommy John surgery. And he's going to miss the entire season and won't be back probably until the middle of next year. That's just terrible. And he's in the first year of his contract with the Rangers. So he just signed a 5-year, $185 million contract with his new team, and his new team is playing great. They're doing a great job. You got Bruce Bochy down there. He's really brought this team down there together. That team's been bad for a long time. And he's only been able to start, I guess, 4 games down there, 5 games. And now he's out. It's a real shame to see him get hurt again, because he's a real gamer. We know him as Mets fans. We know him really well. I've seen most of his starts. You're going to miss starts here and there over the years, but I've seen all of his starts. Today is the anniversary, believe it or not, of his worst start in the history of his major league career, was that start in Texas. And he didn't pitch well. There's that famous scene of Terry Collins putting his arm around him in 2017, telling him that everything was going to be all right. And right after that's when he took off and became the sort of legendary, skyrocketed pitcher. But just going to go over a little bit of his career in terms of just his injuries. This is his second Tommy John surgery. He had a Tommy John surgery when the Mets drafted, right after, I guess maybe a year after they drafted him. He spent time at the time disabled list after getting Tommy John surgery. He actually rehabbed, believe it or not, with Johan Santana in 2011. And he learned a lot of professionalism, how to be a pitcher, just by observing Santana in rehabbing his arm. And then when he came up with the Mets, he's had all these sort of injuries. He's had he dislocated his arm one time, his shoulder one time, or his elbow one time, swinging the bat. Now, 2 years ago, he missed time, and there was word from the Mets, at the time, Mets president and former general manager, Sandy Alderson. He had come out and said that there was a problem with Jake's elbow. So I'm shocked by the fact that he has to get Tommy John, but there's no shock that there was a problem with the elbow, because 2 years ago, Sandy Alderson had talked about the elbow being a problem, and that Jake was very irritated that Alderson had brought that up. Now, there was a lot of a lot of backbiting here. And I've heard this a little bit here and there, that Jake was saving his arm. I never believed that, really, because he was a guy who always wanted to pitch. He always wanted to get on the mound. People were writing to me yesterday saying that the Rangers were saving his arm for October. And it mentions about the Rangers. They had to get to October 1st before they can use him. So I knew that this situation with him going on the 60-day injured list was bad news, because that meant the injury, whatever he was going through with this inflamed elbow, was worse than they were probably saying. And it probably, the swelling was probably such that they probably didn't know what to do with it. So at that point, I guess they told him, why don't we just go for an MRI? And I guess they probably saw that the elbow was, the ligament was separated from his elbow. Just like I said, this is his second Tommy John surgery. Very few pitchers come back from a second Tommy John. So this might be the end of his career. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, you talk about a complete and total disaster for the Texas Rangers in terms of signing him. This is why the New York Mets did not want to sign him to a more than a 3-year deal, because they knew his elbow, they knew his situation. Now, this is the second time in the last 2 years that the Rangers have made a big mistake with a player that the Mets walked away from. The other player that we know about is prospect Kumaraka. The Mets had drafted Rocker in 2021, but there was a problem with his arm, and the Mets walked away. We don't know, because of confidentiality rules and laws in this country, we don't know the exact reason why the Mets did not offer. They didn't even offer Rocker a contract. They took a look at his medical, his X-rays, his CAT scans on his arm, and the Mets walked away. They didn't even offer him a contract. And the New York Mets were heavily, heavily criticized for that. Subsequently, he went and pitched for an independent league, and in that offseason, he had surgery on his arm. Now, coming into this season, he was a big prospect with this Rangers organization, and it just came out about a month ago that he has to get Tommy John surgery. So this is the second time that a Met reject has had to sort of go and get surgery. So a lot of people goof on the Mets medical staff, but this is the second time in 2 years that they've gotten something right about a player's injury situation, and has been proven otherwise. I would also mention this before I forget, and we'll get back to deGrom momentarily, is the situation with Carlos Correa. Carlos Correa, as you know, has had this problem with his ankle. Now, he's had to deal with, from what I understand, heel issues with his foot. The same foot that he broke in 2014 in the minor leagues, which has been a concern for a lot of teams. It was a concern for the Mets, and it was a concern, obviously, for the Giants. It didn't seem to be much of a concern for the Twins, because they went back and signed to a deal. But the Mets medical staff have done the right thing here, and they did not get stuck with this bad contract. Thankfully, they didn't offer him. They didn't even get a chance to offer him anything. So he was so intent on leaving. And from what I understand, when they announced it, he did a little press conference and he was crying. So I feel very bad for him. I don't see how he's able to come back from this. I don't see how he's able to take his career back. Because like I said, I cannot think of one player in the history of this particular Tommy John surgery process and procedure has any player ever come back from that injury. I don't think there's ever been a player that's come back from a second time. So there's a possibility that we might have seen the last of him as a pitcher. And that's sad. It's sad beyond belief to see a guy so great and see his elbow and his body fail him so much. But if you just look at it practically, he's a big guy, he's a tall guy, but there's not a lot of weight to him, and just in terms of his legs are long, but there's not a lot of power there in those legs, and he's a string bean. The body cannot take a certain amount of stress, and I know there's an epidemic in Major League Baseball with this Tommy John surgery. The problem is, and this is from a layman's point of view and a baseball fan's point of view that's followed the game a long time, these pitchers cannot keep throwing this hard. They cannot throw at 100 miles an hour for 5 innings, 6 innings. It will take a toll on your body. And that's what it did with Jacob deGrom. Because when he got to the major leagues, he was throwing 95, but as he started throwing harder and harder and harder, it seemed like the stress was starting to mount on his elbow. And now it gave out again. So to me, that is the issue, is having these starters doing this maximum effort, throwing 100 miles an hour, and they're not pitching. Now, Jake is an ace. He's a guy that really fools the hitters. He pitches. He's not just a guy that throws hard. If you watched him, and I watched all of his starts, he is a true pitcher. But even a true pitcher, if he's throwing that hard on every single pitch, and he's throwing that slider, and that slider will put all kinds of pressure on that elbow. Because when you throw that slider, it makes your elbow twist when you throw it really hard. So this is stuff that I've learned just observing and other pitchers on TV explaining it. Is that pressure on that elbow is such that it can snap. And he throws that awesome slider, but that awesome slider has ruined his elbow again. It's a terrible situation. I feel bad for him. The Rangers didn't do a good job. They didn't want to, I guess, they didn't want to believe what they were seeing with his elbow. The Mets did. The Mets knew and were smart enough to walk away. It's just a terrible story, and it's a terrible situation for a great pitcher. This is a guy that should be looked upon as one of the great pitchers of the last 20 years, a top 10, top 20 all-time great in terms of right-handed pitchers. He's probably considered, at least with the Mets, probably the second or third greatest pitcher in the history of their franchise. Of the Mets franchise, he's probably second or third. And the only reason that he will not be second is because of these injury histories. We know who number 2 is. Dwight Gooden's number 2. And, of course, Tom Seaver is the greatest Met of all time. It's terrible. I wish him well. Hopefully this recovery it's not a quick recovery, but... Well, anyway. Let me know what you think about this video. And, of course, please subscribe to the Baseball Hut 2. Thanks for watching. There'll be plenty of videos, and I'll see you later.